Wow, it's all yellow. Well, how much would you spend on such a painting? My 5-year-old could have done it. I could have done it. I can buy a can of yellow paint. But you see, when you're dealing with a cult, you can't look at things directly from a basis of intelligence. Intelligence is, okay, I've got $50 million. Let's see. I could help to cure malaria. Nah. I could fly to the moon. I could buy a place on a Russian rocket and go and see the Earth from a place, a transcendent experience. Now, I could give 1,000 students that are bright and innovative a scholarship to change the world. At a few $100,000 apiece, plus prize money if you do something revolutionary, and I could spend the next 10 years engaging myself with the most bright and creative minds of the planet. I could stop spousal abuse over in Philippines or do this, that, I could. You know what? I think I'm going to buy an all-yellow painting. Because that's just the kind of guy I am. You're in a cult when you can't even tell the difference between fake diamonds and real diamonds. And people think the real ones are more important. Why? Because the cult tells you they're more important. No, you don't understand. If your child made a yellow painting, that would just be a stupid yellow painting. But this person went to this school. And we all know that anyone who goes to this school is more important than anyone who goes to this school. Well, how do we all know that? Because we've told you that 10,000 times. And they studied with this teacher. Now, we all know that this teacher knew this person. And we all know that that person is way more important than your daughter and this, It's like, oh, I see. I had no idea a yellow painting could be so important. I had no idea. Carry on. Yes, well, of course, they drank the most expensive wines. Well, we all know that the most expensive wines, that people in blind tasting can't tell the difference between the cheapest wines are more important. But because the terror, the feeling of the soil, the smell is just, but the blind tasters can't tell the difference between your wine and crappy wine grown in here. But the history, you don't understand, the cult. There's thousands of years, and just shut up and get out of here. We're having a cult here, and we don't want our thing interrupted by any of these narratives. It's ineffable. But this is a $250,000 piece of shitty tasting wine, and this is a $5 piece of sour tasting stuff. And what the fuck are we doing drinking it anyways? Well, it's been done. It's like, it doesn't taste as good as grape juice. It doesn't matter. Sophisticated people drink this stuff. So, obviously you don't belong at our table. You idiot, get out of here. Philistines. Cultish behavior is reinforced for no other reason that people in stature within the cult are doing it. And they're doing it for no other reason than that people with stature within the cult were doing it. Because cults are self-referential. Trump needs absolutely no data to say, make America great again, or we're the greatest, or we're number one, or I'm number one. He doesn't need any data because it's self-referential. He's number one because he decided he's number one. America's number one because he said it's number one. Sure, it's the number one in absent. It's the number one in obesity. It's the number one in poor care for mothers during pregnancy. It's the number one developed nation that doesn't have any maternity leave. Sure, it's the number one in all kinds of things, but we're not referencing that details. We're referencing, and this is the one area that cults and scientists collude to get very ephemeral, very feminine. No, you don't. It's ineffable. You can't describe just how. You just can't describe it. But it's this way. Kids have got to learn algebra. And they don't need to learn relationship skills. It's traditional. It's the finest. It's the finest what? The finest cult bullshit that's ever been sold to hundreds of generations of people that had much higher probabilities of being happy if they were outside the cult. You see, the scientific analysis of intelligence, the only definition of intelligence that makes any sense to a human being, going back to the iPhone, is if I can walk 10 feet and be 500% happy, or I can walk a mile and be 2% happy, I'm only going to walk 10 feet and be happy. Less energy spent for more sustainable well-being equals intelligence. Which is why we have to ask ourselves, in a cult such as our own, why are we consuming more energy and resources in the history of humankind than any of the 10,000 cultures and cults in human history, with any of their 10,000 cosmologies and deities and languages, and being less happy, having less physical, mental, emotional well-being per unit of energy invested than any culture in history? We are not the happiest culture in history, far from it. And we are spending as much as 1,000 times more energy to be and maintain our level of happiness than the vast majority of our ancestors. So if we're spending 1,000 times more money, to put it into the crass, little pocket of what if we're spending $1,000 to do what other tribes did for $1, if we're spending $1,000 to do less than other tribes did for $1, where is the other reference? Meaning the cult reference is clear. We're important because we're important because we're important because that's what important people do, and we're doing them, and important people are like that because we describe important people like that, and we describe important people like that because they're like us, and we're like us because we want to be important. It's a complete circle of endless loops. There's no intelligence to it. There's no reference to, okay, you've got a choice. You can do this and this and this and believe this and this and this and do this and this and this and relate like this and this and this and have 80% happiness and 2% ecological footprint, meaning you're 98% more sustainable than all these other people. Or you can do this, 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 and this and this, have 1,000% bigger footprint and be less happy. Which do you want to do? It's obvious. You just have to step outside the cult. You step outside the cult. Do you want to destroy your own host? You want to destroy your host body? Do you want to be miserable, or you want to be happy? Do you want to work really hard to be miserable, or would you like to work a little and be happier? What would you like to do? Well, what do other people think is important? This is when you're in the cult, right? Well, in this culture, first of all, you want to wear uncomfortable clothes, and these are the uncomfortable clothes here. Now, in this culture, if you have a little sticker on the back of your clothes, you will be considered very valuable. But you're going to have to work harder to pay 10 times more to an identical piece of clothing that doesn't have that label. Oh, what should I do? Well, the real people only wear the label. Just between the two of us, do you want to be important like me? Oh, yes, I do want to be important like you, so I should wear the label, right? And the real people only buy art from sophisticated people like this. Now, you may have to, con a lot of clients to make $50 million. You may have to sell a lot of lies. But if you can pull that off and buy an all-yellow painting, woo, you'll be on Time magazine. The person who paid $50 million for a yellow painting. Is it good to be on Time magazine? Oh, yes. That's very, very important. Well, why? Well, it is. I mean, do I have to explain everything to you? Apparently, it makes no sense at all. So you're in cult land when your cult steers you into more and more suffering that makes absolutely no sense, for absolutely no reason, other than that important people will agree that you're important if you do those bizarre things, and the only reason they're important is because they're doing them. The only reason they want you to do them is they want to feel important, and this, let's create a scarcity mentality. There's only one Koenig. That's why art jumps in price when people are dead. You could say that art is a lot more valuable when you can talk to the artist about what it means and this and that and the other and this and that and the other. No. You want a scarcity mentality. When the damn person is dead, he can't make another yellow painting. And that's when you know it's really valuable. So we have a cult, and cults, of course, hate looking at cults or their cultish aspects, which is why there's so much attack that gets levied at people. It's like, this person hasn't gone to Harvard. This person doesn't have 3 degrees. This person doesn't have a Koenig. This person isn't wearing the right clothes. They're not talking about the right things. Get them out of here. We can't have intelligence in our cults. They'll collapse in a heartbeat. Now, let's be very clear. This is not the kind of person. If you invite this type of person again into our cult, your history, you're toast. If you tell the public about psychedelics, you're no scientist. The British scientist that the British government hired to explore psychedelics came up, he was a statistician, and he thought he was actually being hired to teach science to its people. So he came up with the idea that a number of psychedelics were 300 times less likely to kill you than horseback riding. Horseback riding being the great British pastime, psychedelics being the devil's work, right? 300 times more likely to have a serious injury horseback riding than taking psychedelics. Well, that's not the kind of thing we want to be teaching our children. How are our children going to grow up and be buffonic fools like ourselves if we give them data? He was dispensed with immediately. We need the right kind of scientist who is not going to educate our people. This is how a cult gets maintained. Sick, diseased, cannibalizing itself, destroying its host body, self-referential to the extreme. Nothing else outside the cult matters. Because the cult is right because we're right. And we're right because we're the cult. And important people belong in this cult, and we know they're important because all important people belong in this cult. And heaven help you if you belong to that cult over there. What, they think they're right? It's absurd. You see, the funny thing, if you know anything about statistics, is the reality that there have been at least 10,000 cultures in human history. Every single one of them has thought they were right. Every single one of them has contained a cult-like faction. Cult is just the part that has no basis in rationality. Meaning, you try and convince a scientist who has any grounding in basic science that a speaker is more important than a listener in communication, and they'll shake their head. You think that you speaking to a deaf person is important? You think that speaking is more important than listening, that the positive side of the battery is more important than the negative side of the battery in creating electricity? Well, I've got news for you. The car doesn't work if you don't have both of them equally. You're a fool. You're an idiot. Get the fuck out of my workspace. I want to get something done. I want a paradigm that works. You see, there's just one trouble, though. The scientists don't control the purse strings for the politicians and the cult. The cult controls the purse strings of the scientists, of the technicians. So horseback riding may be 300 times more dangerous than eating magic mushrooms. But that was $1 million study. Anyone else want to do the $1 million study? Now, we fired the last one. We know what his outcome was. I mean, you understand, don't you? Anyone else want to do the $1 million? Anyone else want to waste $1 million of taxpayer money to come up with some erroneous information so that we can mislead our public for another 40 years? Anyone else want to support the cause of people dying in anxiety and dementia without processing their grief because they've never spent a single hour in the education system on learning anything about their emotions, their shadow, or anything else? Anyone else want to help us torment our people to maintain the status quo? It's a nice purse. At the end of that deluge of stupidity, just think what you could do with $1 million. All you have to do is betray your society, your culture, and please your government. Keep the status quo alive. There's good money in it. Because we invent the money. We don't even have to go mining for gold anymore. We just print a bit more off. Here you go. Thanks for holding up our lie. We'll be back. We need scientists like you to promote our propaganda. Nice doing business with you. Here's some paper that we just ran off our printing press. The joys of capitalism, democracy, freedom for the people, science. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. We're a chauvinistic cult because we value speaking more than listening. That's why there's a Toastmasters, to learn the art of public speaking. And there will never be in America a Listen Masters to learn the art of public listening, because we all know that being an exceptional listener doesn't matter. It's weak. It's feminine. You want the best for your daughter in America? You want her to go out and get some, right? Don't let those men tell you what to do. I hear this from my, wealthy clients all the time. My daughter, she doesn't take shit from anyone. She's the head of her division. She tells hundreds of men what to do. I'm proud of my daughter. She's in command. She's a leader. She runs a $2 billion division. Now that's what I call an important daughter. She has control of money. She has control of men. She dictates meetings, she makes decisions, she gets to the point. And that's my daughter. She is a badass. You know how I got fired? I said it's interesting in America that for a woman to have any value, for a daughter to have any value, she has to be more masculine than the men. What's interesting to me, having listening to many clients like you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, is that all the clients that I know that are proud of their daughters talk about the same thing, their daughter's masculine traits. Could your daughter be valuable in your eyes? And would you be talking proudly about her if the children in her classroom loved her? If her own children felt high levels of self-esteem? If she was happy and did yoga every day and was living a minimalist lifestyle? If she was singing? If she had become a great listener? If people could articulate ideas around your daughter that they couldn't articulate with any other person because she was so exquisite at listening, that she brought things out, she compelled insight in the presence of men and women around her. Could you talk to me about your pride in your daughter on those metrics? Or would you be ashamed because your daughter is feminine? Well, surprise, surprise. That job didn't last. I put the health and the freedom of that daughter to be feminine above making $65,000. And that's not the kind of thing you do in an American dictatorship in which money is the dictator. In America, my job was to prostitute myself and say, wow, that's some daughter. We really need another ass-kicking CEO that isn't going to take shit from their employees. That's just what we need in America. And thank goodness you managed to teach your daughter how to be more chauvinistic than most of the men. What an accomplishment. I'd be proud to work for you, Mr. and Mrs. Wealthy Client, who's gotten rewarded by our cult for following cult dogma. I'd be so proud. Let me stuff my truth. Let me stuff the cringing of my own feminine feelings about all this. And suck up to get your money. Because that's the kind of thing we need in this cult that values money above people, the masculine above the feminine. That's the kind of bullshit we need a little bit more of to see if we can push just over the edge and maybe destroy the planet. See how many people we can create before we destroy it. No one's going to tell me what to do. Free sex, free this, more dominance here, more money here, more this, more that. Buy more stuff. Oh, so exciting. What you went to this, oh, I can't even absorb it all into my body, but I need to consume. I need to order things and then send them back. That's how important I am. In China right now, where they're learning this game, the wealthiest billionaires measure their status by showing up at clubs. And the status of the man is measured by how many bottles of champagne are opened. Going back to the cult dogma, it doesn't, of course, you could easily make champagne that tasted delightful, even more delightful from new and cheap brands, but no. We want $2,000 a bottle champagne. And the news that, will get you elevated in the cult in China, in Shanghai, and etc., will be, did you spend 100,000? Well, a mere lightweight. 200,000. 350. They opened 350,000 bottles of the most expensive, they spent $350,000 on the most expensive champagne imported from the traditional regions of France. Now, of course, they didn't drink it. They opened it. They had the hottest prostitutes, the Ferraris. Now don't you want to be like that? Don't you want to suffer and study stuff you're not interested, put up with your ass licking of idiots, pretend that you can't see the absurd? No, the emperor's dressed up just fine, as wonderful. Wouldn't you like to have so much money? Betraying this environmental law, destroying this, lying about this, making cheap, shoddy crap. Wouldn't you like to have so much that you could blow $350,000 on a single night? It just moves me to tears to think that I could one day be worthy of such accomplishment. It's a stunning, staggering. No, I don't have time to have sex with all these prostitutes. But to think that I've arrived in the presence of such greatness. We traumatize the shit out of our kids. With sociopathic parenting, we are so effective at telling men that they are worth nothing. I mean, Trump learned this before he was 5 years old. How many adults do you have to watch? Smiling at a sociopathic dictator, Trump's father, and looking away from the tears and the shame in the child, Donald Trump? How many ass lickings do you have to watch as a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old boy? How many times do you have to have maybe a nice person working for your father say, I'm sorry it's so hard for you, but I can't say anything in front of your father because he pays the salary? Before you realize my feelings, who I am as a person, is worth shit in this country. Who I am as a billionaire, though, I can shit all over all kinds of people as well. And they'll do whatever I tell them because that's what they did for my dad. They didn't protect me. They're not going to protect anyone else. They're going to protect their paychecks. Aha. So I need to, this is, classic Donald Trump, someone writes something truthful about him in the paper. He sues them for $200 million within a day or so. There's a 2-inch stack of paper from this and that and this and that and the other. He says, however, come on over to my office. We may be able to settle this out. This guy's a journalist doing his job. He comes over and he says, look, I could grind you in the dust with 2 inches of legal papers and stuff, or you can work for me. I like your spunk. Just use it for me, and I'll drop this whole thing. What do you say? Here's $100,000 a year. Okay. Trump's got a new sycophant. Just proved yet again that truth doesn't matter, that character doesn't matter, that dignity doesn't matter, that common decency is completely irrelevant in America. All that matters is money. So make sure you have a lot of it and use it to bully everyone else. And we, being the good cult followers that we are, oh, he must be important if he is $4 billion in debt. Wow. But look at the gold toilets. Wow, it must be very important. I'll bet he could afford a $50 million all-yellow kids painting from the very best universities. It's a mythology. It's a cult mythology. We value teaching more than learning. You don't get education without both, but we value getting to the point rather than sharing the pattern. We value in our chauvinistic the individual more than the group, so good on you. You got ahead. That's what I like. The hustle. You figured it out and got ahead. Good for you. Good American. We value big rather than small. We value our military more than our relationships, our ability to bully more than our ability to make peace. We go constantly around the world bullying other people. I know an interpreter. Watched it right there. 2 presidents bullying the Indonesians, lying about it to all our faces. The answer? Rewrite the interpreter contract so that no interpreter can tell even their wife the truth. Should cover it? We'll just sue their fucking ass into the ground, decimate their career. We'll see if any other interpreters feel like telling people the truth. The audacity of telling the truth to our president. Who does he think he is? A measly interpreter? Look at me. I'm the president. I don't have to tell the truth. Well, this began with Bush and Clinton. So, what, do you think it's new with Trump? The symbol trumps the core value. Christianity talks about the danger of worshiping the false idol, the symbol rather than the essence, the golden calf instead of the teachings. The Human Awareness Institute versus human awareness. America is number one versus doing things that lead to more well-being for more people. I want to tell a story that this has been leading up to. And the story begins with my grandfather. It begins earlier, but we'll start it there. He won the lottery and went bankrupt. They don't teach business in school, so he went bankrupt, as most lottery winners do, trying to make a public garden. He was drafted and sent to France, where he was put in a tank driving over some of the finest gardens in the world, the gardens that he loved, in order to defend France from Germany. Blowing up, driving his tank around through one garden after another, through the countrysides of France. Shell goes into his tank, blows up, shatters his knee, terrifies him. He's in a confined space. No one's there. There's no one dealing with the grief of his regressed helplessness, the terror, the loneliness. He's told, as every American has been told for generations, that real men don't have feelings. So he goes numb and dissociates. He feels terrified and helpless. He develops PTSD. Now, as any good chauvinistic military will do, you will be dismissed, and once your knee is somewhat patched up, you're good to go. Because your feelings do not matter in a chauvinistic paradigm. The fact that he feels terrified, the fact that he feels enraged, the fact that he feels helpless, the fact that he feels shocked, the fact that he startles at the slightest thing and feels out of control, the fact that he feels violent towards anyone who shocks him doesn't matter because that's one of those feminine things. So he goes home and abuses his wife until she becomes an alcoholic. Now, children don't matter, those innocent, helpless individuals, those people in the feminine stage of life. The feminine stage of life is the early innocence of birth and the elderly innocence of the very old that reach that luminous state of the fool where they remember that all of the dogmas on this planet are just that there's a bigger world out there, that there's a sense of wonder, which is why the elderly and the young in any intelligent culture spend time together, not in hours. And so my father is born with a 90% chance of being terrorized and traumatized because not a single adult in our entire country would ever go up to my grandfather or my grandmother and say, "How are your feelings after the war?" And if they ever did ask such a rude and uncultish but intelligent question, they'd say, and hurriedly evade the topic because it's shameful to have feelings. Well, naturally, my father is tormented and develops his own form of trauma and PTSD by the time he's 6 years old. The beatings, the shamings, the emotional dissociation, the violence is such that he stops growing up. He becomes a terrified 6-year-old. The thing he's most terrified is the humiliation of being caught in his feelings and being beaten for them, because real men don't have feelings. So he studies metaphysics, Rudolf Steiner, develops a metaphysical bookstore, a health food store, an organic restaurant. He participates in the hippie movement. But none of those like dealing with psychology. They don't like dealing with trauma. They want to be positive. They want to get high. So none of that touches the underlying PTSD. He finds another woman in my mother, a sexual abuse survivor who's dissociative since the age of 4, who can't meet people and deal with reality because it's too terrifying. When your father uses you and your mother betrays you, it's too terrifying and lonely to be present. So now we have 2 emotionally unavailable parents. Now, none of them are going to get an exam and say, wow, you are going to be given an innocent child in about 9 months. We care about that child in its vulnerable feminine state, and we want to make absolutely sure that child is safe. So we want to encourage you to read these books. We want to encourage you to take these courses. We want to encourage you to do a psychological examination to see, will you harm this child or will you help it grow up into a healthy, balanced human being that honors its heart, its body, and its mind? Intelligent. Will you be intelligent? But of course, the military didn't want to deal with PTSD to save money. So when the stories started coming in of violent vets terrorizing their family, the military first ignored it, denied it. Then they tried shaming their people. We can't be responsible for these weirdos that behave this way. When Bessel van der Kolk came along and started exploring the hints of PTSD and dealing with this, they wouldn't give him the funding to deal with it. So he had to leave the VA to learn to help his people because his country betrayed them. When the local local person I was talking about her homelessness, talked about how she got homeless because her husband went off to the military and learned that to be a jock, he had to be sociopathic and talk shit about his wife, and he came back traumatized and chauvinistic and beat her. So she ended up on the street, where we've made it illegal for her to sleep in her car. So she hides her car from the police so she can sleep in her car illegally, making herself easy prey for the sociopathic men we raise in a sociopathic country, that we foment in a sociopathic military, and she's gang raped, hiding from the police. Like so many children are exploited hiding from their parents, the people who abuse them right and left, resulting in an estimate of 1 in 30 American children unsupervised running away from home to escape the level of chronic emotional, physical, and sexual abuse in this cult. We discover vague hints of the travesty of our emotional genocide by the odd, cautious study, like the Adverse Childhood Experience Study Test, which was fought tooth and nail. You're never going to find anything. No, there's no correlation between childhood and adulthood. Who you are as a baby pine tree has nothing to do with who you are as an adult pine tree, is what the sociologists are saying. It was just a few decades ago when the estimate of female incest in the textbooks created by white men said 1 in 4 million American women are a victim of incest. However, let's not be too negative about this. It seems, by all accounts, as if this might prepare her for married life. Being dominated by a man, early sex education, and it's not a big deal. It's only 1 in 4 million, and it's probably a good thing. This stuff is bullshit. 1 in 4 Americans, conservatively, is going to experience sexual abuse, and most people don't even know what it is. The incest rates are more than 1,000 times higher than those textbooks. But we are a cult of denial. And like the statistician who was fired for telling the truth and bringing the shadow of a cult into focus, we reward the scientists who help us hide our shadow, as we have always done. My parents induced 3 out of 5 children to suicide. My parents have dealt with trauma their entire life. There has never been an adult that I know of who observed the obvious symptoms of abusing and abuse and wanted to do something about it. Instead, as I demonstrated the obvious symptoms of abuse, bedwetting, hyperactivity, nightmares, shame, unregulated emotional energy, the obvious symptoms of trauma that even a teenager with a little bit of, reading a few pages could spot. We're going back to that economic model. You see, my parents were paying the Waldorf school teachers not just to raise good children, but to make them feel good as parents. Now, how do you do that? How do you make a parent feel good when you acknowledge the obvious truth, children don't just exhibit these symptoms for no apparent reason. Being the good parents that you are and isolating your family from media and all that to correspond with Rudolf Steiner's idea of how to raise a child, you are your children's primary influence. What you do and don't do with each other and with them is the primary influence on how safe they feel in this reality that you are curating within this country. Within this country that does not give a single exam or a single test or a single recommendation to a single parent, despite the reluctant mounting science of intergenerational abuse cycles. So, inducing trauma and complex PTSD, inducing depression, inducing repression, inducing all kinds of traumatic coping mechanisms in all 5 children. I wonder what's wrong with the kids. You see, the military asks what's wrong with the men, that they become violent when they come home from war, because real men don't do that. That started as a tradition in the British military, who didn't want to fund the reparation from the First World War to help men recover and integrate in the culture, and so they just banned the science. There will be no more mention of shell shock, the term for trauma at the time. There will be no mention of that. And we will not fund any scientist that does talk about it. And real men who were real men before the war can get on with stuff. They're not pussies like these people that we've traumatized into oblivion. The stupidity raining down from our British ancestry and culture is barbaric and sociopathic in the extreme. It triggers the reptilian brain. Fight, flight, freeze. Triggers it more in men because we're even more sociopathic to men, because we do one thing. The mitigating factor in trauma is affection, expression, and empathy. Well, we've got a good recipe for that. We can't have our traumatized sociopathic men healing their trauma. I know. Let's call them gay. Well, that doesn't. What does that mean? Well, it means they're friendly and affectionate with other men. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Well, it is. It's feminine. Real men are not feminine. We're not pussies. We're not like those lower sex that can't think and can't vote. We're real men, and we can't have any acknowledgement of the femininity within the gender. Anyone who's caught being effeminate, who's caught being affectionate to other men, we are going to pound the shit out of them. You fucking pussies, you assholes, making us look weak like those women. You fucking assholes. Get out of here. We're going to kill you. We're going to make it illegal to be affectionate with other men. Get the fuck out of our gender. Okay, I guess that remedy to healing PTSD is off. No affection, no emotions, no communication. Well, I guess we'll just have to accept that men commit suicide much more than women do for some mysterious reason. Locked in a sociopathic trauma induced by the culture, induced by our military, dumped on our children, dumped on our boys. And then we women, right? We women, we're so noble, we're going to be kind and sensitive to those shattered, terrified, and broken men. Nah, they're not hot. I like a bad boy. You know, someone who's got a little edge, you know. I don't want one of those effeminate, weak. He's not going to make a lot of money, make me important. He's It's not going to be very masculine. I just watched the documentary of Goodbye, Christopher Robin. The woman is the most sociopathic of the three. Next comes the father. Next comes Christopher. You should see the rage directed at men who break down, who have grief. That rage is dumped on the 2-year-old child, emotionally, energetically, and physically. And we carry this grief in our bodies as our African American ancestors carry it in their racial memory, in the framework of projection and identification. Because when you're traumatized, you dissociate it. It becomes too overwhelming, and you lose a sense of reality, and you lose touch, and you become ungrounded when you're traumatized. It's bigger than the ego. Trauma is the phenomena of a threat presenting itself of a size and intensity that overwhelms the ego, that floods the ego in the same way that you have perspective of the hand, and you have perspective until it gets right here, when everything you can see, smell, and hear is the hand. Suddenly everything else stops to exist, and you move into a timeless realm where there's no distinction. There's no before, and there's no after, and there's no future. It's just horror all around all the time. You do anything to grasp on something solid. You look at the Peter Pan chronicles of that nightmare, the island of nightmares, and how desperately they would cling and drag anything down with them. They'll look for anything that's solid. And what's solid is the most intense emotion and the strongest identity. And this is usually for men a sociopathic identity. Control. I'm overwhelmed. I've got to get control, because that's the only thing that feels familiar. I've got to get out of this swamp of dissociation. I can't keep track of it. I need control. And then some little kid comes in and moves your book. I'm losing it. I've lost control. Where's my book? How dare you take my book? 2-year-old can't deal with this. And in our cult, 2-year-olds deal with it all the time. The raging mother, the raging father. They don't get to be 5-year-old without dealing with trauma and dissociation in our cult. But it gets worse, because we move into school where you get bullied for being effeminate, where you get bullied for having feelings, where you get shamed for being feminine and crying, where anything emotional like a relationship. I mean, why do kids attack kissing or flirting so much? Oh, did you hear so-and-so likes so-and-so? They have an emotional bond. Well, let's humiliate them about that. Let's expose them. Let's laugh at them. Let's all band together to make sure that they know that being feminine and forming a relationship, transcending the individual myopia, will get you humiliated. Oh, unless, unless she's the most beautiful and he's smart, or he's a badass, right? Okay, so you get social ranking. Women, it's usually about looks. You know what all the adults pivoted the attention of my grief and my terror and my trauma to? The fact that my mother was vacuous and lied and betrayed and this and that, the other. The fact that my father was sociopathic and violent at times and cruel in his incisive jests and stuff. This, of course, didn't matter, because this was the feelings and the experience of the child. What mattered, and where every adult around me would pivot any hint that any of this was going on to was the following cult standbys. Wow, but your mother is so beautiful. Or a little bit older, wow, so sexy. I mean, who cares if she's lying or telling the truth? Who cares if she's not present with reality? Who cares if she can't feel her own feelings? Who cares if she's 4 years old emotionally or then flips into being a dissociative 17-year-old? Who cares? She's beautiful. Now, you don't need love. You don't need integrity. You don't need intelligence. You don't need emotional regulation. You don't need secure attachment. What you need, if you were not so dumb as a 5-year-old, what you really need is a woman with breasts that look like this and with hair that looks like this. Because if you've got that in the cult dogma of stupidity, you've got it made. You've got a great mother. It's like, it's not her breasts that I'm worried about. It's the fact that when she tells me she's going to do something, where my mind goes is, how is she going to lie this time? And how is she going to lie about the lie? And then lie about that so that I feel shitty about thinking that my version of reality actually had any value whatsoever, when it's obvious that her fantasy is way more important than facts or any other thing. And how lonely will I feel, buried 6 layers deep in those fantasies? How lonely will I be knowing that I don't exist because my version of reality is the most threatening thing to her fantasy that she knows of? And she will rage and beat and avoid and punish and shame until I agree not to exist, so that she can sustain a fantasy world in which the sexual and physical molestation of her childhood didn't happen, because she can't deal with it in a cult that would tease the hell out of her, would shame the hell out of her mother, might rip her away from the one familiarity she has, might lead her parents to hate her, because she knows this is a cult of lies. And she knows no one wants to hear that truth. And since they all praise her beauty, she just spends hours every day make-upping and mirroring and preening in the fantasy world where nothing real actually exists, and where her little children are there to entertain her princess and be fondled and treated as little dolls and fantasies, because that's what feels nice. And the Waldorf school and nice wool little blankets and this and that fit so tidily into that fantasy. Shh, but don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone what the emotional world is in this family. Don't tell anyone that there's anything beneath the facade. That putting your child in a dryer and turning it on is not okay. That abandonment games and threats terrorize a child for life. That these things are not civilized kind, intelligent, mature behavior, and that no amount of sheepskins or organic food or lies about lucky childhoods can erase the loneliness of being buried behind so many lies that even the burial is forbidden to be spoken of. And the essence of the soul and the individual is asked to remain in that coffin, where it was placed by both protectors and providers and colluded by an entire culture. Stay here. Don't move. Don't break the spell that we have woven, upon which we build the fantasy in which you do not exist. And it's so wonderful. It's so wonderful because when you and your pain don't exist, my betrayal and my pain doesn't exist either. And since we all know that can never be dealt with in a cult like our own, isn't that better? Shouldn't we just have another bowl of cornflakes? And isn't this nice? Oh, and your father, yes, he's not a sociopathic, shame-based, trauma-inducing, regressed child with PTSD. No. That would be a little bit too close to the truth. He's a genius. Look at him out there, the Cultural Freedom Fund, a nonprofit, building passive solar homes, the director of an offshore currency hedge fund making money. Oh, and he named it Gaia Corp. Gaia Corp. Wonderful. Making money, paying lip service to the environment, terrorizing his... No, we don't talk about that. He's so smart. He's so... Your father, you're so lucky to have that father. Oh, and he reads a channeled book, studying Ramtha and this and that, Edgar Cayce. Why should we fix our family problems? Edgar Cayce has predicted the end of the universe in very short order. I don't want to waste my time fixing things for the family. I mean, it's the end times, So many wonderful stories about how not to take any responsibility. A cult of complete collusion with parental abuse. Because no one could spend more than 10 minutes with my father without seeing his pain. It would hint in at the eyes, in the tone, in the sarcasm, in the bitterness. Because he was a man in pain his entire life, by being asked to carry the cult's lie. The cult's lie that his feelings didn't matter, that as long as he was a genius, as long as he married a bimbo, not because my mother's nature was a bimbo, but because that was the way she survived, was to dissociate from reality and become a bimbo that made everyone in our culture very, very comfortable. They loved her as a bimbo. They wouldn't have liked her as a true, expressing human being, so she never became one. They wouldn't have liked my father talking about the beatings and the horror of his childhood and the grief he felt and the shame that he felt and the lack of control that he felt. Nobody would have come over of any note and interest to hear those stories. Because no one wants to hear them in this cult. Because it's part of our denial. So my father had a repertoire of other stories, including entertaining his guests by his children's stupidity. I would be paraded in to show how dumb and ignorant I was in this area or another, and his guests would titter, and they would get on with feeling important about themselves. In school, where children are exhibiting trauma symptoms every day, you will not learn anything about trauma. You will not learn anything about childhood abuse. You will not learn anything about repairing trauma. You will not learn as a child that it is not your fault. You will not learn anything at all of any use around this. Now, I attended Waldorf School at Hawthorne Valley Waldorf School in upstate New York. I attended public school in Philmont, upstate New York. I attended public school in West Hoathly, the town of West Hoathly in Sussex, England. I attended the Michael Hall Waldorf School in East Grinstead in Sussex, England. I attended public school in Cyprus. I languished in a luxury villa on the 45 minutes out of the city with a swimming pool, etc., kind of figuring out what to do with myself. I attended boarding school again at Michael Hall in East Grinstead. Then I attended the Findhorn community in Findhorn, Scotland, taking workshops normally reserved for adults, and moved on to Phoenix International School for Peace and Ecology in Birch Tree, Missouri. Then attended Waldorf School in North Vancouver, Canada, before sitting down and doing some evaluation. And I went back to school after languishing in a luxury villa in Cyprus because in blistering heat, despite the tropical waters, despite the great snorkeling and windsurfing, the boundarylessness of my family's culture combined with the boundarylessness of having zero structure, the ache of being around family conflict and not being able to talk about it, it just felt too painful. And so I went back to Michael Hall as a boarding student rather than stay with the family in Cyprus. When my family moved to Findhorn, which is near Inverness in Scotland, home of the Loch Ness Monster, or so one would be told, I went up for the Easter holidays and I took an experience week at the Findhorn community in Scotland. And that was after attending a conference in which Sam Keane, author of Fire in the Belly, provoked discord at Findhorn by talking about the absurdity of one of Scotland's main military bases existing in conflict with Findhorn just a few feet away. There literally was a barbed wire fence, and then there was the air base, and then there was this spiritual community, and they were not on good terms with one another. And, of course, the obvious question is, if you're teaching peace and goodwill and New Age thinking and pioneering new thought, but have not figured out a way to deal with your neighbors. The air base would sometimes seem to make a point of flying fighter jets at key points to irritate the Findhorn conference attendees and their spiritual lectures, and the Findhorn folks had nothing good to say about the airbase. And I watched the uproar as Sam talked about this absurdity and the lighting the person doing Sam's slides who worked for Findhorn was, had to shout out from the slide room, "You don't know what you're talking about," and you realize that this is a group that in some ways doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't have emotional regulation, can't engage in debate. And yet, I knew as a 13-year-old boy that this was far more interesting than anything I was learning at school. And so I proposed to leave, was rejected on all sides as it being a terrible idea. Everyone at Findhorn says, "No, you should go to school." My parents seemed a little bit ambivalent, and I stayed. I took the experience week and watched in amazement as a group of strangers coalesced into a harmonious field within 10 minutes of a specific technology at Findhorn called attunement. It's a non-hierarchical structure, and in it, the field, in this case referred to as devic consciousness, but the field around optimal energy for the workshop, optimal energy for each individual, optimum energy for the Findhorn community was invoked. And if you know anything about Findhorn, they came into existence in the 60s or 70s when Eileen and Peter Caddy started growing award-winning, record-breaking, enormous organic vegetables in the hostile sands of the Scottish wilderness. And this isn't supposed to be done. It's cold, it's sandy, it's inhospitable. And yet they would listen to the consciousness of the plants and allow themselves to be guided not by horticultural knowledge, but by the technology of devic communication by contacting the consciousness related to what Rupert Sheldrake might call the morphogenetic field around the plant. And so they would gather seaweed at the beach following plant instructions. They would plant the plant on this day of the moon cycle. They would water the plant with ground up compost of this, and they didn't seem to know what they were doing except attuning to the plant. And this attunement technology led to the role of focalizer. Focalizer is the individual responsible for attuning to a certain level of consciousness. In this case, plant consciousness. In the case of the experience week, the focus level of the group. Now, if you've come to Findhorn, usually as a tourist or someone trying to experience, it's because it's like, wow, they 400-pound cabbages, giant cantaloupe that shouldn't be able to grow north of this. It's like we want to see the magic of the Findhorn garden. So everyone's coming with that in mind because that's the thing that stands out, particularly in a materialistic framework. Something's got to be going on for, giant vegetables. But of course, blending in with the community, to experience the community, there's not enough room for everyone to do stuff in the garden. There's 4 places. And there's 4 places to help house clean. And there's 4 places to help cook. And there's all these different places and roles. And there's about 22 strangers in a group who've never met before, who've all come, in a sense, inspired by the divas in the plants in the garden. And they want to have their experience. They want to have their photos and take home their narratives of the Findhorn garden. So the focalizers, facilitators, say, who wants to work in the garden? And everyone raises their hand. And they say, obviously, there's not enough room for everyone. There's enough room for 4. But there's enough room for 4 in this and 4 in housekeeping and, So everyone closes their eyes. and practices their very first attunement, where they feel their rightful place within the field that is Findhorn. Eyes are closed. And they ask each person, I want you to feel the place that is the right place for you to have the experience you need to have at our community. As I was sitting there, I noticed visions of cooking in the kitchen, and the words forming in my mind of cooking. I was as interested in the garden as anyone else, but I knew that the right place for me was in the kitchen. 10 minutes later, everyone opens their eyes. How many people for the kitchen? 4 people raised their hand, including me. How many people for house cleaning and toilet work? 4 people raised their hand. Spontaneously. And I know I've witnessed a miracle because I've never seen a non-hierarchical power structure focused on energy field and attunement. And I've just witnessed 22 adults that in my household or any other power structure I've participated would have resented, debated, compromised. It would have taken hours of bitter cajoling to get these people to be, and then I didn't get to do the garden, it was so unfair. But no. It was a seamless 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Exactly the number of people into exactly the right number of positions. And I was part of the miracle because I didn't know what had changed me from wanting to work in the garden to wanting to work in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, I did a lot of dishwashing. I had a blast. Got on people's nerves as a 13-year-old. I was by far the youngest person in the group. Would create vortices in the sinks filled with hot water, and the pots would rise up out of the bottom of the sink. It was wonderful for me. But I knew at the end of that what I was learning in school wasn't half as interesting as what was going on up here. And so I again left school. But that fizzled out. I couldn't just keep taking experience weeks. The group dissipated. One of my first experiences of the dissociation and the relative meaninglessness of language versus felt experience was when my father, in a money-saving move, he found this school, Phoenix International School for Peace and Ecology. I was in Findhorn, it was in Birch Tree, Missouri. Our family house was tiny. I was sharing a room with one of my 4 younger siblings. My mother wanted to get rid of me. And so off I went with a little sweetener, being told that I could meet the author Ken Carey, author of Return of the Bird Tribes and the Star Seed Transmissions, channeled books I had read while at Findhorn by a channeler out in the Missouri mountains, not far from the school. Well, I got to the school and there were 5 delinquent boys, 1 rather angry man, and an Angora goat herd. And school seemed to consist of stretching fences and repairing barbed wire fences to corral the goats, to shear them for Angora wool. One kid was in there for stealing cars, and his parents had shipped him off. It was $500 a month, including room and board. my father did good to find such an economical location. Owner of the school was a bit sheepish because he knew I came from Findhorn, and far from being ecological, they'd gather all their garbage up at the end of each week, drive it out in a Chevy pickup, and set fire to it in a pile in the forest. Food was hot dogs and buns for me as an organic vegetarian. And I learned to cook because I couldn't eat the food. So at 13 years old, I began smelling herbs and what's this? And tasting different things and fiddling around. There were no cookbooks, and there wasn't an internet at the time. But I learned how to cook. It started a long tradition of inventing more than 1,000 different recipes from smell and taste and imagination. Pretty soon all the other kids wanted to eat my food because it tasted better. It was more interesting. So I got my first job. Everyone was jealous that I got to have actual food, and so the school owner hired me for $5 a meal once a week to cook for everyone else so that they wouldn't be so annoyed that I was eating decent food. And yet, I slowly relapsed into the kind of depressive, dissociative state that I experienced in Cyprus. There was no structure. There was no routine. Not a single one of the kids was the slightest bit interested in Findhorn or any of the values and thoughts that might extrapolate out from such an experience. I remember they used to giggle and titter at me. And pretty much all it was they'd say, "Who are you really?" And then they'd titter and all look at themselves as if I was a joke. Because that's the question I'd asked them when I got in the van to first go to the school. Who are you really? Something I was thinking about. My sleep routine moved into the evening, later and later. Finally, my routine consisted of going to bed at 5 a.m. after meditating, fasting, reading fantasy novels, walking in the moonlight alone. I'd sleep the whole day and do the thing over again. And I found myself falling deeper and deeper into dissociative numbness where nothing felt real. I didn't see how this could go on. So I rejoined the family who was now in Vancouver, who wanted to start Waldorf school. And yet, going back into the noise, the clutter, and the insanity of high school, it was overwhelming. And it was also patently absurd. I did a quick analysis of the subjects we were studying, and I asked myself, how many of these subjects are going to be relevant to me in an adult life? And I couldn't come up with more than 20%. I didn't think 20% of what I was learning would actually be useful to me as an adult. Then I looked at how efficiently I was learning the 20%. I'd learned things on my own. I'd learned things with tutors. I'd learned things with mentors. I'd learned things at Findhorn. And here I was learning things at high school. The whole protocol seemed to be 40% of what was optimal. So I was learning 20% useful stuff, 60% inefficiently, and my entire life was consumed with meaningless homework so that teachers could stay up at night having to grade stuff that had no meaning. And I felt sick of it. So I left school one more time. But this time I knew I needed to have a routine. And I needed to not just fall backwards into structurelessness, but to forward something. And so I asked myself the question, what can I learn and study that will be useful for this planet over the next 100 years? Ecology, sales, philosophy, yoga, metaphysics, creative writing and advocacy work, starting a business, poetry, goal setting, studying successful people and the ways that they had worked and achieved things. And so I created a structure in which I would work at these subjects, and grounded imagination was by far the most important topic. Grounded imagination is a technology of design that I created, of analyzing possibilities and synthesizing them. You see, within design, you have a goal. Make my garden beautiful. Build me a house. Win this war. Whatever it is, you have a goal. And then you have values. Going back to intelligence, nobody wants to spend $100,000 doing something they could do for $10. And so a good design is respectful of resources, including time and money. Nobody likes to spend 20 hours learning something they could learn in 5 minutes. There's a goal of efficiency. There's a goal of efficiency of money, efficiency of time. There's a goal of effectiveness. How reliable is the protocol? And you come up with a good grounded design by you scan all the possibilities and you look for something that achieves as many values that you hold dear as possible with as little energy as possible. That is, as sustainable as possible. That's grounded imagination. That's grounded design. It's good design. Meaning I make almost all my money, I think I have made all my money in this life, by showing people ways of doing things with their land, with their houses, with their gardens, that achieves more of what they want and value with less hassle, less time, and less money than any other possibility that I can imagine. And by studying this topic and getting to know a field, I'm good at it. I can walk onto a site and see things that other people can't see, and I can articulate how doing it this way saves time, money, betters the environment, increases childhood safety, decreases toxicity, increases real estate value, decreases maintenance over this other option over here. It's called grounded design, grounded imagination, looking at a wide spectrum of ideas, honing them in to what meets all of the values. And then you also realize, of course, that different people value different things. But I want to emphasize the way that we sell our children out. Now, by the age of 15, 16, 17, parents, adults who had children, who I would encounter, would say, wow, I wish my son, I wish my daughter was doing these kind of things. I didn't drink. I wasn't taking drugs. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't lying. I wasn't wasting time. what I was doing made sense to me, and so I worked at it quite diligently. And I began achieving the vast majority of my goals, set out daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. I began getting to the 9-month part of my yearly goals and realizing I've done them all. Because when you plow away at things on a daily basis, when you manage time in 20-minute increments, 400% more productivity is released by that level of focus and organization. It's very masculine. It didn't make me happier, but it made me productive. It's a skill in competency. It's a masculine trait. Now, there's a juxtaposition here between outer competency and inner felt experience. Because while this was happening, I had my first wave of wanting to commit suicide at age 14. And I want to dwell on this because as far as I know, meaning it's come at me from several places, suicide is the second leading cause of death in young Americans. The second leading cause of death. Now, this is a stunning statistic. It's a stunning thing to realize because lions don't kill themselves. Even miserable, starved lions don't start banging their head against a rock and killing themselves. Birds don't kill themselves. You have to look pretty far and wide until you can find another species in nature's cornucopia that is in so much misery and pain that they actually spend their own resources actively killing themselves. It's a very unique phenomenon. The only place that I've heard of it, other than amongst human beings, is the tarsier monkey in the Philippines. Now, tarsier monkeys are a tourist attraction because they're one of the tiniest monkeys. They're about this big. And they rank high on the sensitivity spectrum. Because they rank high on the sensitivity spectrum, they get overstimulated into profound pain and discomfort very easily. A tarsier monkey will move its hand as it's climbing a tree like this.